Alrighty, so we are now recording our sleep and sensory family training. So just the agenda we did some quick introductions, ground rules for today. We talked about that. Please use the chat feature. And when we have time for questions, please try not to use any identifying information about your student. We want to keep all of our information as private as possible, but this is safe space to answer questions as they come. Okay. We're going to go over some sleep strategies as it relates to behavior and sensory, and we'll have time for questions. So we are going to get started. I'm going to try to close this meeting control. Hopefully you guys can see my screen okay. So I start with this slide, and I always feel like it's a little silly. Why do we need good sleep? Do we have to answer that question? I guess we can all, if we have children, can identify how we feel differently with good sleep and without, right? But parents, families, okay? There are negative impacts, right? So when we don't get good sleep, and guess what? When our kids don't get good sleep, the chances are that we're also not getting good sleep, right? So poor daytime functioning, rates of depression, maternal depression for mothers are increased when we don't get good sleep, and marital discord, okay? So problems within marriages are more likely to occur when people are not getting good sleep. What about our kids, right? So we see a lot of impacts of sleep on children. So when kids don't get enough sleep, they are injured more often, okay? More unintentional injuries if they're not aware, or tripping or falling over things. Their temperament or behavior can be affected. There's even studies on obesity that children who are fall in that obese category, good sleep affects the likelihood that they will, be overweight. Poor academic performance. As kids get older, there are correlations between sleep and academics. Okay, and we talked about behavior problems, non-compliance, aggression, even self-injurious behavior has all been hypothesized to be increased when kids don't get enough sleep. So good sleep is important for everybody, for good health, okay? So let's define this. Like, what does good sleep mean? I want to think about a couple categories, okay? So good sleep means falling asleep quickly, okay, within 5 to 15 minutes. It means staying asleep throughout the night, okay? It means getting an appropriate amount of sleep over the right amount of hours, okay? It means getting up in the morning without a lot of trouble, okay? And then not feeling drowsy throughout the day. So when we're talking about good sleep and thinking about good sleep for us and our children, this is how we're going to define it, okay? So we're going to switch gears a little bit to talk about sensory, because the sensory systems and sleep are very interconnected. So having a good baseline for understanding the sensory systems is really important. So again, this information was created by an occupational therapist. I'm just going to be reviewing it today. So all of the information that we receive about the world comes to us through our senses and our sensory systems, right? So we learn about the 5 senses at school, right? As young kids: hearing, right? Touch, taste, smell, vision, right? So all of this information we get about our world and our environment comes to us through the different senses. What I think is a challenge to understand is that sometimes we as adults and individuals, and children, especially children maybe on the autism spectrum or kids with sensory differences, actually interpret the information in the environment differently than others, right? So some kids are sensitive to sound. I have 2 kids of my own, and I will use them as examples throughout this presentation. But both of my kids, one more so than the other, is very sound sensitive. So what I perceive as a sound, let's say toilet flushing in a bathroom, okay, doesn't bother me. I'm not startled. It is not uncomfortable for me. But for my son, a toilet flushing in a bathroom, right, kind of startles him. He gets a startled response, and maybe he'll cover his ears. Okay, so he is interpreting that sound differently than I am. He is more sensitive to loud sounds than I am. Okay, so young kids, like I said, especially with sensory differences, and guess what, guys? We all have sensory differences, right? Do you have something that you just like, oh, I just can't touch that, right? Our sense of touch, mine anyway, is very sensitive. I don't like touching cotton balls. Oh, I just get that like chill down my spine when I even think about it, right? So, but most people can touch cotton balls without a thought, without, oh, this is fine. It is a comfortable sensation for them. For me, not a comfortable sensation, right? So if we go through all of these senses, which I'm not going to, but children can be impacted differently by the same stimuli in the environment as we are, right? Whereas a classroom might not be visually stimulating for me. I might not get distracted. Another kid, right, might be interpreting, right, the sights in the classroom as visually distracting, right? So I just want us to think about that as we're talking about our senses as it relates to sleep, just understanding that we all interpret our environment differently through our sensory system. Now, there are more senses. I'm going to just touch upon these again. I am not the expert, but occupational therapists are. So if you feel like your child has differences or sensitivities to these areas, then it is important that you talk to your occupational therapists about these different areas. So proprioception. Proprioception, another word for it is body awareness. So here's an example. Right now, I'm sitting in a chair, right? I feel grounded in my chair. I feel my bottom on the chair. My hands are grounded on this table. And I feel where my body is in relation to where I'm at my desk in my office, okay? For some children and some adults, if they have some sensitivities to the proprioceptive system, they may not feel grounded when they are seated, okay? Sometimes we have kids who kind of like slink, right? They like slink down their chairs, right? For those kids might have difficulty with body awareness. They don't feel supported, right? They don't feel their body weight as it relates to the chair, right? They don't feel where their body is in relation to the environment around them, okay? We also have a vestibular system, which I think has something to do with the fluid in your inner ears. Again, not an occupational therapist, but our vestibular system is how our body interprets different movements, right? Some kids rock, right? Some kids hop a lot, right? Their body, right, needs those movements more so than a child or adult with typical vestibular development, right? Because that makes them feel grounded. That makes them feel neutral. Whereas if I started jumping up and down right now, I would start getting, my heart would raise. I'd probably get out of breath. Oh, sorry, that's my walkie-talkie. I'll be turning that off. So what I was saying, if I was jumping up and down, right, that might impact me, but I might start to feel more energized, right? Whereas some kids jump up and down and it makes them feel, maybe energized for a moment and then calm, right? So the vestibular system and the proprioceptive systems are two systems of our senses that are commonly addressed within occupational therapy because they do impact kids' behavior, ability to adjust, and their overall ability to regulate. Okay. Some other sensory systems, just for fun, pain tolerance and temperature. So sometimes, kids interpret getting hurt, their pain tolerance is different than others. And same with temperature, hot and cold. Some kids aren't as sensitive to those as others. Okay, so just tip of the iceberg, talking about sensory, talking about how our environment and how our body moves can impact us, impact kids on an everyday basis. Okay. So how does this relate to self-regulation? So a person's ability to adjust or control their energy level, emotions, behavior, and attention is how we define self-regulation. How do we then, given this information and how we received it, how well are we adjusting, right, to stay kind of neutral, right, within our bodies? We say that appropriate self-regulation suggests that we do this in a way that's socially acceptable, right? So when a child can self-regulate, it helps them to feel in control of their body. It helps them to feel successful and have more positive interactions with others. And it can help to develop good self-esteem, okay? When a child isn't regulated, they can feel very out of control, right? And that doesn't help them to complete tasks or create friendships, right? So it really can impact them negatively. So now, what does this have to do with sleep? So a child's nervous system learns to regulate their responses to the environment to soothe or lull themselves to sleep. Okay, that's what we all hope. So let's think about strategies that you have tried to help your child sleep. You can put them in the chat box or you can unmute. What strategies have you tried? And I can share some of mine too. I've tried probably everything to help my kids sleep. Both of my kids are not great sleepers, which is pretty ironic considering I do this training. But I'm going to kind of talk to you about strategies that I've used, those that have been effective, those have not. And I kind of identified why my kids aren't good sleepers. So we'll get there too. But I've tried everything. I've tried different colored lights, night lights, music. I've tried like diffusers with essential oils. With my son, we used to have to do some like movement, like some yoga, some stretching. Sometimes we still do. And even I would give him like squeezies before bed where he would like lay down and I would just like give some like little massages or pressure to his back, to his arms, to his whole body, his legs, his feet. And we had a whole routine that helped to get his body a little more regulated and ready for sleep. Does anyone have any other strategies they want to share that have been effective or maybe not effective to help get their kids to sleep?
I'll share, Sharonda. Yeah. I guess for me with my son, I try not to have too much go on throughout the day for him on the latter end, the afternoon or the nighttime. Because like you said, I tried weighted blanket, I tried dark room blinds, white noise, um, also try just to squeezes the pressure at night. And sometimes all of those can be a negative because sometimes they may not want the weighted, or they may not want the darkened room, or they may not want the white noise. So it's almost like what they've gone through the day will determine how they're going to sleep and what they can tolerate. So for my son, last night, he did actually get a good night's sleep, but then my husband woke us up early. Um, so my son was cranky because he could have slept longer. But nevertheless, with last night, what we did was a bath, a warm bath. We always do that every night. And I don't know how you guys feel about melatonin, but sometimes I have to give him the melatonin just to kind of get him relaxed a little bit, you know. And so I give him some, and he'll sort of get like a little groggy, you know, almost like how they had a dental procedure to give him a little something just to take the edge off. So, but he's not like, oh, you know, falling down, ready to go to sleep, but we'll take it down. And I'm finding more so that if he had too much, like let's say I ran him at Sky Zone, or he went to his elevators, or he went to too much overstimulating things, almost like an adult, like having a couple movies. You watch a couple movies at night, and or you had a stressful day and you replaying all the stress. You know, I kind of think that those kiddos are sort of the same. It's just their body just can't process the stimulation too much at night. So I've tried to limit it, even though it's hard to do because they, like you said, Danielle, sometimes they need uppers. So you're taking them to the playground. You're trying to jump some of this nervous energy out, and sometimes you overly do it. And then when you overly do it, you say, why? Because they're out of sync,
Right.
falling out, crying, you know, won't sleep. But yeah, that's just my thing. So I was trying to hear other strategies that you guys use because, like you said, some nights you try all that and it just doesn't work, and sometimes like you have a milestone where now you can clip your nails or you can get your hair cut. I'm waiting for the sleep to click over to where it'll just be a milestone where it'll be, wow, he just figured it out. So yeah, so you guys, I'm all ears to what you guys do. Yeah, what do you do?
Thanks, Rhonda. Thanks for sharing. And we'll talk more about other strategies to use. And I think you're right on point where their day is going to impact their bedtime routine, right? And so sometimes your days are going to look different, right? So that can impact where their body is, right? How regulated they are, you know. Does anyone else want to share any other strategies that they've tried? If you do want to share as we go, you can always put it in the chat. I'll move on a little bit and we're going to talk about some strategies. So, implementing before sleep, calming activities. So, I talked a little bit about this with one of our current OTs here at Easter Seals. And I do think there is this focus on calming activities before sleep. But what she also shared with me, and this might be helpful, and it was helpful with my kids, especially my son who had a really hard time with sleeping, is before you get to the calming, right? You have to meet them where they're at. So if your child is very active or they seem kind of overstimulated, right? Meet them where they're at first and then slowly try to create activities and opportunities for them to calm. Okay. So heavy work and movement are very good strategies that help to regulate our proprioceptive and vestibular systems. Okay. Those systems are important to regulate for sleep. Okay. So when we talk about our vestibular system, a lot of the times we talk about inversion activities. And sometimes you'll even see young children do this on their own, right? Or they like lay on off the couch, like dip their head down, right? This is when your head, like you look at this picture, like that girl in Downward Dog, their head is hanging below their body instead of on top. Okay. So somersaults, holding a kid upside down, doing some yoga. Okay. Those sort of inversion activities can help some children to regulate their vestibular systems. Okay. When we talk about heavy work, okay, we can do wall push-ups, right? Where you literally, if there was a wall in front of me, I just stick my hands out and one, two, you do push-ups on the wall, right? It's creating work and tiring out the muscles in their upper body and their arms. Also, think about like they have animal walks on here, right? If you ever say like walk like a bear, right? Or if you do wheelbarrows, right? If you have your kids put their hands down on the ground and you hold their feet and they walk with their hands, right? That is heavy work, right? Because they're using the muscles in their upper body and chest, but it's also a little bit of that inversion, right? I know we just mentioned weighted blankets, right? So for some kids, it works great. Some kids, it doesn't, right? Remember, every kid's sensory system is different. And that's what's important to remember. What works for your child might not work for mine, and vice versa, right? But having them, carry books from one spot to the next, helping clean up their toys, right? Just having them move heavy objects or pushing a shopping cart, right, with some heavy toys in it can help to regulate these systems. I mentioned a little bit about like giving my son like squeezies, deep pressure, right? So massage and pressure on the head, even the chin, the shoulders, the arms, the back, can also help kids who don't have that body awareness like we talked about, can help to give them some awareness of where their body is. Also, tactile play. I know some of you have probably heard of like sensory bins, right? Using rice or sands in a big sensory bin. I had a family group, was before COVID here, where I had a mom that said she got one of those big like Tupperware like totes and would fill it with like sand or rice, and they're literally their whole kit in it, and they would just play, right? But the scooping and dumping and pouring with that tactile play also provides heavy work. Bath time, okay, is a great strategy to use. And has a multiple sensory systems related to bath, right? You get some tactile play with the water, temperature, whether hot or cold. You might have smells, right, from the shampoo or whatever you use, if you have lavender scented stuff, right? So great strategies for bedtime. Think about the environment as well. I struggle with it a little bit, especially as my son gets older. But the visual, right, our vision systems. If the child has too much to look at bedtime, there's a lot of stuff in their room and might be hard for them to calm. So try to maybe limit visually the items that are in the room. I know some other calming visual strategies is visual bottles, but even like lava lamps, right? Or some night lights can help with calming as well. So thinking about all the different systems. And this can be implemented throughout the night. And we're going to talk about that too a little bit. Lighting. Predictable movement. So we'll talk about this later, suggest that if you have a light with movement, that you leave it on all night or don't use it at all, either static or moving consistently. You don't want to start the night or start the bedtime routine with something that turns off in the middle of the night. And I'm going to talk to you about why in a few moments. There is some research on red and orange lighting as a nightlight. Apparently blue screens, blue light, can mimic daytime, right? Which is why it can't be great. It's not great to have a lot of screen time before you go to bed, okay? It can make your brain actually think, oh, it's daytime and I should be awake. So the red and orange lighting does not mimic daytime. It can actually promote sleep and encourage nighttime behaviors. We talked about smells a little bit. Diffusers, books with smells. Lavender is a smell that induces calmness. Now they have like, I saw in the store, they have like bears, like stuffed animals that have scents attached. You can put them in the microwave and like warm them. So again, different ways that you can incorporate the different senses into the bedtime routine. Sound machines. We talked about white noise, okay? Predictable sounds like a fan, right? I would just encourage you, if that's what you're using, that you use them consistently, right? And keep it on throughout the night. Even when we talk about slow music, like lullabies or classical music, right? Try to keep them on throughout the night or don't use them. And we're going to talk about why. And you can try, as we've been talking about, to use a multi-sensory approach. Think about all the different senses to help with self-regulation. Maybe you have some classical music on while you're, running and crashing, right? So maybe you're going to meet your kid where they're at if they're active. And this crashing we talk about, is sometimes kids like to kind of fall or plop or run and fall into like a bean bag or some pillows or the couch, right? Again, meeting them where they're at, it can help with body awareness, and then you go calm from there. Okay. Stop and go activities. We didn't talk about that a lot, but stop and go activities, especially for our young kids, can really help them to self-regulate, right? Stop and go, such as freeze dance, right? Or even having little relay races. Teaching stop and go can help them to regulate their bodies, and incorporate that with lights or music. Cold water. So there's actually research in this area too. So cold water can help reset our parasympathetic nervous systems. Okay, so playing in cold water, even like for adults, doing like a shot of cold water at the end of your shower, can provide some nice kind of reset, calming. So if you are going to do water play with your kids, it's okay, do it with some cold water and see if it helps them while calming. I've mentioned this a couple of times now. The strategy you add during sleep should be presented throughout the night. Okay, we're going to talk about that. Before we get into some of these behavioral sleep strategies, I want just the OT that created this with me just wanted to put a little note in here about sleep apnea. There are two types, central and obstructive apnea, and sometimes the symptoms of poor sleep are actually sleep apnea. So here are some of the symptoms: snoring, gasping, restless sleep, nocturnal sweating, sleeping in weird positions, increased nighttime arousals, and daytime sleepiness or behaviors. If you have any inkling or feeling that they might have apnea, please follow up with a medical doctor to determine if any additional steps need to be taken. So we're going to talk about setting a good sleep goal. Remember, we started kind of talking about what does good sleep mean. So think about, if you could pick one thing to work on, what would it be? Do you want your child to just get a nice developmentally appropriate amount of sleep? Do you want them to fall asleep quickly within 5 to 15 minutes? Or do you want them to sleep through the night? And what does it look like for you? Is it independently? Is it with you? Is it in your room? Think about what would be a step in the right direction for you, your child, your family. So we're going to talk a little bit about some assumptions that behavior analysts have in regards to sleep before we start talking about those behavioral strategies. The first one is that falling asleep is a behavior or a skill, which means it can be taught, right? We can control variables surrounding sleep and help to teach those skills, right? They look at sleep problems as skill deficits. So let's start with the goal number one: getting a developmentally appropriate amount of sleep, okay? So sometimes difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, or compliance during nighttime routines occur if a child is expected to be in bed too long. And I have seen this before, okay? Difficulty waking up or daytime tiredness can be related to a kid being in bed for too short of a period of time, right? So what do? Let's start by looking at your schedule. We need to schedule in a developmentally appropriate amount of sleep. So here are some sleep duration recommendations. Sorry, it's a little blurry. I'll send you the slides as a follow-up and you can kind of look at this a little bit more. So if we look here at preschool age kids, okay, the recommended amount of sleep is 10 to 13 hours, but still could be appropriate 8 to 9 or 11 or 14. Okay, so there's kind of a big range there. So some kids might need more or less sleep than others. Remember, everyone is different. Okay. Also, let's point out our own age range, adult, 26 to 64. We're probably most of us are there, or 65 and older. Okay. 7 to 9 hours of sleep with 6 on the low end and 10 on the high end. Ugh, what a luxury. I have a young child still too. So I'm like, oh, 10 hours of sleep. But yeah, think about ourselves. Like 5 hours of sleep is really not enough, right? So we should also be scheduling in enough time for us and our kids to sleep. So this is just important to note because you're going to think about what time are my kids going to bed and what time are they getting up in the morning. Do you need to move bedtime or do you need to move wake up time? There have been situations where families have been like, well, I'm not getting the kid out of their bedroom or out of their crib until 8 o'clock. Well, that kid has been up since 6:37, right? And they are now done sleeping. And if you don't help them, assist them in getting out of bed, you might see challenging behavior. I have kids that would bang their heads or scream or cry or, bite the railing of their crib, right? So think about what is developmentally appropriate for them and think about what then an appropriate amount of time to be asleep looks like. And again, it might be different if you have that big range, right? For each kid. So that was goal 1. Goal 2, I want my kid to fall asleep within 5 to 15 minutes. Okay. We're going to talk about the forbidden zone. Okay. So putting kids to sleep during this forbidden zone of time will increase the likelihood of delayed sleep onset, which means they'll take too long to go to sleep, sleep interfering behavior, and routine noncompliance. So before we get to the solution, I'm going to talk to you about this forbidden zone of sleep. So this little line, blue line, is a general line that demonstrates alertness throughout the day. So if you start over here where it's alert in yellow, right? So, and then you go down here, the bottom is blue is sleepy. So we start at the nighttime, right? We're sleeping, and then we wake up, we're at our almost highest alertness in the morning, right when we get up. There's that midday dip in the middle, okay? So some of our kids would nap during that time. And then look what happens. There is a spike. There's a spike in alertness for everyone, okay? Right before bedtime. So if we try to put kids to sleep in the forbidden zone, you are fighting an uphill battle. And I used to do this with my son. We would try to put my son to bed for hours, 2 hours. But the problem was we were trying to put him to sleep during this forbidden zone. Now, everyone's line of alertness, everyone's kind of up and downs might look a little bit different, but overall, okay, this is what our pattern of alertness looks like for kids and adults. So after that midday dip, where we're all tired and want to nap after lunch, right? We have a slow spike, right? And then we drop down and it's time for bed. So what do? Knowing this information, how do we use this information to help our kids to sleep better? So here's what you can do. Set the start of your bedtime and your sleep routine later than when they fell asleep the night before. It sounds like crazy, right? But I did this with my son. So if he was fighting me from 8 to 10, okay, guess what? You're probably gonna do it on the weekend, but put them to bed at 10 o'clock, okay? Or 10:15, okay? Because, oops, sorry, I'm gonna replug my computer in because I'm sorry on this. We're gonna start that routine later, and then we're gonna gradually back up the sleep time earlier and earlier, okay? Because eventually you will hit that zone. You'll find out where that zone is for your kid, right? You start later and you fade your bedtime earlier and earlier, okay? As they are successful going to sleep, okay? It makes sleep more valuable. If they are tired, they will go to sleep. So start the bedtime later. Oh, I fall right asleep, right? Then we're gonna move it back 15 minutes. Okay, 9:45, still tired, going to sleep. 9:30, still tired, going to sleep. Okay, let's try 9 o'clock, going to sleep, right? I'm gonna back it up, 8:45, going to sleep. Now I back it up to 8:30, nope, you hit your forbidden zone. You will find the sweet spot for your kid. We did this with my son. We could not put him to sleep. 8 o'clock was too early. It was just, he was in that zone still, right? So around 8:30, 8:45 is a sweet spot for my son. So this faded bedtime routine can help you to identify the forbidden zone and create a bedtime that works with your child's level of alertness, okay? And guess what? I'm gonna go back to that forbidden zone. When you're up there, that forbidden zone, right? You're doing your routine, right? So maybe you're gonna remember you start them up high. So if they're alert, right? Maybe you're gonna start with a game of freeze dance. You're gonna dance and freeze, okay? And you're gonna be fun and silly. Maybe you'll do some crashing activities. Maybe you do a little obstacle course. And then you're gonna start bringing it down. Okay, you're gonna meet them where they're at and you're gonna start bringing it down. All right, now maybe we're gonna do some stretching. There's really cool like animal yoga poses you can do. You can just practice maybe some wall push-ups, or maybe you're gonna do like wheelbarrow walks to the bathroom to start your bath. Okay, so meet them where they're at their forbidden zone and slowly bring them down into their nighttime routine. Okay. So I'm going to be real honest. This is where I struggle, and I know why I struggle, but I'm going to explain this to you. Goal 3 is sleeping through the night. Okay. This is, I think, what all parents dream of, right? Here's a big tip that I've been kind of giving you hints upon. When things that are there or occasion sleep are removed, okay, or not available or not present, a child will wake up. Okay, here's an example. They talk about sleep dependencies. Okay, my sleep dependency has always been TV. Okay, it's a problem, I know. But when I met my husband and we got married and we moved in together, and he was like, I cannot sleep with the TV on. We have to use the sleep timer. So you can fall asleep with the TV, but it'll turn off throughout the night. So we tried it, and guess what happened? I would fall asleep with the TV on, the sleep timer would go off, and I would wake up every time that TV went off, right? Because my brain is so adjusted to going to sleep with the TV. When the TV is removed in the middle of the night, I'm popping up and popping awake. Okay, this can happen with multiple things. It can happen with TV, electronics. I said like music. If you have music on, leave it on all night. It can be bottle. The kid's going to sleep sucking on a bottle or a binky, and then that's removed. It could make them wake up. It might be a full belly, right? Kids that have those big full bottles before bed. We're like, oh, I've always heard it. Like their belly is supposed to go to sleep. Right, helps them to go to sleep, helps them with onset, but doesn't help them stay through the night, because then if their belly starts to be empty or less full as the night goes on, it could cause them to pop up awake. But here's the kicker. Guess what? I am my children's sleep dependency. Right? If you put your kids to bed, if you are rocking them, patting them, singing, cuddling with them, you are your kid's sleep dependency. So how do you get them to be independent, right? You need to fade out yourself or fade out those other sleep dependencies. So if you, like me, I know I am my kid's sleep dependency and my husband is my son's sleep dependency, get to a point where you can maybe stand next to your child's bed, okay? And you're not gonna pat them anymore. And you're say, okay, it's time to bed. Maybe you'll sing them a song. Maybe you'll just stand there and say, okay, time for bed. Maybe you'll say prayers, whatever your routine is. Maybe you read them a book, right? But you're slowly going to fade yourself out of the bedroom, okay? To a point where you can just walk them in and say, okay, get in bed, good night, right? So trying to fade those sleep dependencies. I know, like patting my kids. I mean, it's very typical to pat a toddler to sleep, right? But then when you stop patting, and they don't have that tapping throughout the night, it can actually arouse them midnight, okay? So think about things that don't need you to be there, things that you could send to grandma's house, like a blanket, a stuffed animal, even the white noise machine. Think about things that could be there without you, right? That will create a more independent sleeper, okay? And this is a chart that shows you that night waking is typical, okay? We all have these periods of REM sleep and awakeness or alertness throughout the night. So if you look at this chart here, you'll see where it says deep non-REM, light non-REM, and REM sleep, right? Where that is, and those yellow dots are actually periods of alertness or awakeness throughout the night. So we typically go in and out of REM sleep. So when our brains are more alert throughout the night, if those things that we had, like the TV or like a padding, are not there, it can pop us right up to awake. Okay, so the night waking or the alertness isn't the problem. It's the I get almost there and I'm going to go back to sleep. It's almost reinitiating sleep. And that is much easier to do if all the things that were there when you went to sleep are still there and still in place, if that makes sense. All right, so this is a lot of information that I shared. I know it's a lot, but pick one thing to try. And like I said, every kid is different. What works, even if you have multiple children, what works with one of your child might not work with the other child. So pick one thing to try. I'd also suggest, if you're trying to work on these sensory strategies and self-regulation for sleep, that you do reach out to your child's occupational therapist. They should be able to provide some more specific support as it relates to your child and their sensory systems. Okay, I do have some resources there. I'm gonna stop sharing, and I'm also gonna stop recording. Just give me 1 second.